You're listening to the Apple Insider Podcast.
Welcome to the 111th episode of the Apple Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Victor Marks, and joining me is our editor-in-chief, Neil Hughes.
Hey, Victor, how's it going?
Amazing. How are you today?
Amazing as well.
Well, it's two of us. Epic. I hope our listeners out there are doing well, too. Let's dig in. This is going to be an episode chock full of rumors and politics. Let's go ahead and start with rumors. So, I am looking forward to an iPhone 8, but I got to ask you a question. But before we talk about iPhone 8, are we going to get an iPhone 7S before we get an iPhone 8?
Yeah, and for long-time listeners, this will be a little bit of redundancy, obviously, but for those of you who may not listen all the time or maybe aren't up to date on the rumors, the expectation this year is that we will get 3 iPhones. We will get a new flagship $1,000 plus iPhone 8 with a completely new design and all kinds of new technology, which is why it'll be so expensive. And then we will probably end up with 2 lower-end, more traditional phones, an iPhone 7S and an iPhone 7S Plus that will look largely like the iPhone 7, but can include a few new features, faster processor, maybe some wireless charging, that sort of stuff.
Right, and the reason why I asked that question the way I did is that in years past, we had what some people call the TikTok schedule, right, which is that you release a 7, and then you release a 7 Plus, and then the year after 7S. That you release an 8. All right, let's just say that again. As you say, we release a 7, and then the following year you release a 7S model, and then the year after that it bumps to an 8. And so the TikTok schedule is the major model change, and then the speed bump S version, and then another major model change. And this year, what I'm trying to get a sense of, and you're telling me, is that we're going to get the S model and the major model change at the same time?
I think what happened there is Apple got into a branding scheme that consumers were comfortable with. And if they were to call last year's phone a iPhone 6S2 or something, I don't know, some ridiculous name like that, then people would have looked at it and said, oh, it's not really a full upgrade, and then would have held off. So by sticking with that TikTok naming convention of calling it the iPhone 7, they didn't have to market it poorly. But I think that you've kind of seen Apple move to a 3-year and longer redesign cycle on the iPhone, just for a number of reasons, including the fact that the industrial design is very mature now. So there's not really as much of a need to change it every year, every 2 years, whatever. But I think that in our I'm trying to think of a positive way to put it, but a consumer culture that we have, everybody wants to have a new design. And certainly culturally, there is a status symbol of having the jet black iPhone 7 Plus or whatever. Right,
having the antenna lines change and smoothing the camera into the body slightly better, and having a non-physical home button, sweeping enough changes for people to really consider it a new model. Is that what you're telling me?
For some people, yeah. I think that none of that really should matter that much. It's very superficial. However, it does matter to a lot of people. We have kind of a disposable culture in many ways. Something looks new and shiny and we want it, and we throw out the old one. So I think that the product cycle has been extended in some ways, whereas the naming conventions kind of have to stay the same for marketing reasons. Marketing, doesn't always line up properly with what you can actually create. Those are 2 different things. Just because you market something as an iPhone 7 doesn't necessarily mean that internally the design is the truly next generation design that you're working on. And so no one really knows what they're going to call this high-end iPhone this year. We've just taken to calling it the iPhone 8 because that's all we really know of Apple's naming conventions. But other rumored names have been iPhone X or iPhone Anniversary or iPhone Edition.
Edition, like the super expensive Apple Watch that they didn't sell for very long.
Right. Well, they still sell it. Now it's just the ceramic one. They just got rid of the gold.
Does it still cost $10,000?
No, it costs $1,000.
Oh, well, in that case, I'll have 2, please.
It's actually pretty nice. I've seen it in person, and I really like the look of it. I would spend $1,000 on an Apple Watch if it came with an LTE radio and all that.
Well, yes, that would make a ton of sense. So we're going to get 7S models that are speed bumped versions of what we have, and an improved thing that may be different. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah,
all at the same time?
It's looking like we'll get, well, maybe a little bit later on the 8. That's not unheard of for Apple to do, to say, well, this one's out this week, and then the fancy one in a few weeks kind of thing.
Right, but they'd announce it at the same time, right? It wouldn't be a surprise announcement for the fancy one, would it?
No, they're not.
That would be
they are not going to do that.
Difficult.
No, I think that this may be similar, but to a more extreme extent of what you saw with the jet black iPhone 7 last year, either limited availability at launch or almost no availability or launching later. I think that the high-end one is going to be very hard to get, and also demand will be lower just because of the cost. I think that this is an easy way for Apple to kind of ease into the switch to OLED in the iPhone, just because there's only one primary manufacturer of OLED globally right now, and it's limited capacity. So for Apple to ramp up that production becomes more difficult and potentially problematic. So by limiting it to just the high-end model, they can, and charging an arm and a leg for it, they can kind of curb demand a little bit and still sell a boatload of phones.
Right. So this model is going to be made with a screen by Samsung. Is that right? Samsung is the maker you're referring to there?
Yeah, that's the expectation. I mean, they have something like 90% of the world's capacity of OLED or OLED manufacturer, as people say. So I think that Samsung will be the primary, if not the sole, provider of OLED screens for the iPhone 8.
It's unusual because Apple tends to want to let's say, hedge their bets by having multiple suppliers of parts.
They do where they can, but it takes time sometimes. Don't forget that for many years, Samsung was the sole manufacturer of the A-series chips for all of Apple's mobile devices. So it took years for TSMC to really up their production to a level where they could compete with Samsung. And you can see some of that now, some of the supply chain rumblings and rumors. You always got to take those with a grain of salt, obviously. However, when you look and see Foxconn, Sharp, Japan Display starting to invest in OLED, and Apple kind of maneuvering behind the scenes, I think that Apple's looking 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road and thinking, how can we make sure that when we want to have all OLED on all of our phones and all of our iPads and all of our Macs, how can we be sure that we have quality, we have options, and we have enough to meet demand?
Right. So expect a new model, expect it to have OLED, expect it to be difficult to get one and costly.
Right. And so we ran a feature this week about OLED and some of the reasons that Apple might switch to it. The reasons for it are numerous, but not so pressing that Apple's going to force its entire lineup to do OLED. You can have thinner displays with the technology. You can have curved designs. So, for example, those Samsung Galaxy S Edge phones that have like kind of a wraparound on the corners and stuff.
Right. When you do a swipe from the edge, you're actually just you can see things on the edge. You can use that as an extra row of places to put buttons, and you can swipe from the edge, and it's seamless kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think that Apple is going to do that necessarily, but I could see them having just kind of a rounded surface on the top for reasons of fit in the hand and comfort and that sort of thing. That's one of the expectations for the iPhone 8. But there are other applications that would be beneficial to users as well. Taking up less space allows for larger battery, and also the technology behind OLED is different from an LCD or traditional LED panel. So with those types of things like you have in your TV or what have you, or your phone or your computer even, they are illuminated by a backlight behind it, which while there are dark areas on the screen or even black areas, they're still somewhat illuminated by the backlight. Whereas with an OLED panel, one of the reasons it's thinner is because it doesn't need a backlight. And the reason it doesn't need a backlight is because each pixel itself is individually illuminated. So that means that when you have an OLED screen, the blacks on it are truly black. They're not actually, they're turned off.
They're off. They consume no power.
So one of the reasons that you may see a dark mode user interface for iOS 11 this year would be to take advantage of that display. So if you use an Apple Watch, the UI is primarily dark because the Apple Watch has an OLED display. And so I would expect that if there is an iPhone 8 with a OLED display, that you will see perhaps an optional dark mode user interface for the iPhone to really eke some more battery life out of it.
Definitely. So this is kind of cool, though. I mean, a lot of people have been asking for OLED for a long time based on their experience with Android phones and OLED. Color reproduction has gotten a lot better. It wasn't always as accurate as it is now.
It's still not as good. It's still not great on the Apple Watch, but that's a smaller, cheaper display too. So
well, but in terms of being outside in full sun and being able to read the device,
right? Yeah, especially with Series 2 watch, it's much brighter, and it has its advantages. OLED displays are very bright, but I always liken it to, like when you go to Best Buy or whatever, and they have all the TVs there on display and they crank up the contrast all the way and the brightness. It's like
demo mode.
It's like human beings buying electronics, and we're all guilty of this. Even I am. We're all like insects attracted to light, and we're gonna get zapped by the bug zapper at one point, but. It's funny to me, like, because I keep my phone almost permanently on like the lowest possible brightness setting just to maximize battery life.
Of course you do.
When I pick up somebody else's phone and the brightness is like cranked up all the way, it always kind of takes me by surprise. It's like, oh, look at the really nice screen on here. And it's really just about the fact that they have like a normal or high brightness on their phone draining their battery, whereas mine is always super dull. And so when you go to that new screen, it's like, oh, this is exciting. And so I think that is one of the reasons that on Android phones and the comparisons and stuff, why people always say that OLED is so much better than the iPhone screen. They're bright displays, which has its advantages, obviously. But I think that brightness alone does not a great display make.
Yeah. No. It's interesting you mentioned that demo mode kind of thing for consumer electronics stores, because how we use anything in those stores is completely irrelevant to how we actually consume them or use them in our day-to-day lives.
Right.
The TVs being all out of whack for colors and stuff. You get TV home, you have to calibrate it first thing so that it actually looks right. The same is true of audio products in those stores, right? You go in and someone's cranking up the speakers so they can hear the bass.
Right.
No one listens to it that loud, I swear.
No.
At least not for any length of time.
No, they don't.
It's nuts, but that's what it takes to show off an iPhone. And so you see on those fixtures that they have in Target and places like that where they have an iPhone locked to the display, that the brightness is cranked way up on those things.
You have to compete in a marketplace, whether or not you like it, whether or not you can tell consumers all you want that you have the best display, the color accuracy, reproduction, all that is right. But if people go into a store and are attracted to shiny things, then you have to compete on that front.
Yeah. I once had a buyer tell me, buyers for retail, right? They pick which products go on the shelves. And I had one basically say he evaluates audio products like that on the basis of what's going to make me stand up and say, that's unbelievable. I need to tell my mom about that. That was his path for making a buying decision.
Well,
and if the speaker didn't make him do that, he wouldn't do it. So it's the same for phones and same for everything, really. It has to be the thing that makes you say, that's what we have to have.
Well, and especially in the phone market, where everything's just a little black slab, essentially. Like, how do you make your product stand out? That is a problem that every company faces. And to be clear, all of this is not to say that OLED is not good technology and that Apple shouldn't switch to it. There are many advantages to doing it, but there's also just the realities of being competitive in a consumer electronics space.
Okay. So, but OLED isn't the only thing we're going to get on this iPhone, right? We're also talking about wireless charging and the invisible home button and glass sandwich design and cool things like that, right? Mm-hmm. So, are we going to get this right away? How long after is it going to be after the September reveal?
I would expect that. I mean, there have been times in years past where Apple waited about a month and a half before it hit market to kind of ramp up production. They could do that for reasons this year, including limited availability of parts, also to keep the design a secret until they unveil it. That was one way for Apple to keep the Apple Watch design secret before it was announced, because it didn't actually launch for another 6 months after they announced it. I don't think you'll have to wait that long for the iPhone 8. It will be on the shelves before Christmas. I also don't think it will be as bad of a situation as it was with AirPods, where they launched a couple days before Christmas. I would say expect an iPhone announcement in September. Expect the iPhone 7S series to go on sale within a couple of weeks. And the iPhone 8, I would be surprised if it went anywhere past mid-November, but I would expect maybe October timeframe would be my best guess at this point.
Okay. And what do we think it is that's pushing this out? Because there's got to be some feature that's causing this timeline delay.
Well, we just talked about OLED and how there's limited availability of that. There is a completely new industrial design, glass sandwich, as you said. Apple is introducing entirely new 3D facial recognition technology for the FaceTime camera.
That's where I was going with this, the 3D sensors, because we hadn't mentioned that yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of new technology in there, but that's certainly one of them. And what makes that one more interesting is that it's going to be proprietary technology. So it's not like the OLED screen or some of the other parts that Apple is just buying in bulk, as any other phone manufacturer would. This is probably going to be a combination of some tweaked off-the-shelf hardware and some sort of programming that Apple is going to be doing on their end to customize this and turn it into a solution that nobody else has or can compete with right now. And you've seen examples of this in the past where Apple will introduce things like Touch ID. And I think this is going to be along the same lines where it's going to change in a lot of ways the way you use your phone, but also could prove to be a bottleneck for production.
Right. And my comment on something like that, where it's a feature like Touch ID, is the first generation of any of these things that they do is always good for what it does at that time.
Right.
But then you prepare to buy a new phone when they develop what it can really do, kind of thing. I think back to the iPhone 5S where it got Touch ID, but you weren't able to do Apple Pay, for example.
Right.
So we'll get this 3D sensing technology. We'll see what it can do. It'll be cool. And then I'm almost positive they'll refine it in the next version after, because why would they stand still? And that's the one you'd want.
And there's expectations that they're going to let developers tap into this 3D sensing technology on the FaceTime camera, but I wouldn't be surprised if you have to wait a year for that, just because that is kind of how Apple rolls. They do it nice and slow. Touch ID wasn't available to developers till a couple of years or a year after it launched. Support for some of these features takes some time to be opened up. I mean, developers still can't tap into the NFC chip on the iPhone. So whether or not that 3D sensing facial recognition technology is available to developers at launch is a big question that I have going into it, because I can see the pros and cons of it. The limited use case of it for what Apple would offer, which would essentially be, logging into your phone and some Snapchat-like video features, is basically the furthest I could see Apple going with it at launch. But if they open it up to developers, then that could be a big game changer. Definitely.
All right. Now, one of the quick articles that I wanted to talk about is something that Roger published about Siri. We beat up a lot on Apple about Siri. Many people do. But Siri is available in 21 languages across 36 countries. And Cortana supports 8 languages across 13 countries, and Google Assistant, which is the one that replaces Google now, if anyone can keep up, speaks only 4 languages. And Alexa is available in English and German. So as much as people like to pick on Siri for not being a very good speech assistant, it does quite a lot. So what they do when they want to add a new language to it, and this is just interesting to me, that's why I'm taking time on it, is that Apple starts by having people read passages in a variety of accents and dialects, and then these passages are transcribed manually so that computers know what they're supposed to be learning. And after being supplemented with a huge number of sounds captured in a range of voices, they build a language model that tries to predict word sequences. After they have all the data, they release dictation. They don't actually go full on to Siri. They go with dictation first, and then after dictation support works, they release the language.
Yeah, it's interesting. Cool. I can't speak to the abilities of Siri in other languages because, like a typical American, I only speak one language, unfortunately. But yeah,
that's me saying shame on you.
I took about 8 years of Spanish when I was a kid, but without any actual use of it in my daily life, it just kind of goes away. So, I can't speak to how well Siri performs in other languages. I will say it has a long way to go in English, though.
Well, there are a couple of different parts of this, right? There's the recognition part, and then there's the processing and finding the answer, right? And you'll have different failures as you ask a question. You'll get the failure where it doesn't understand and transcribe properly what you said. That's one failure. The other failure is the one where it transcribes properly what you said. It knows exactly what you said, and then responds with, I can't find anything about this. Would you like to search the web?
And then there's also server errors where you ask it something and it goes, I can't help you right now, even though it hears you accurately.
Yeah, but that's a separate problem from the AI problems involved. That's a availability problem.
But that happens on perfectly good connections all the time for me. So
you're in New York.
Yeah, well, I read it all online all the time. People saying that it just randomly doesn't work for them. So I don't know.
I have that less and less. What I have more of is the difficulty with it actually responding with a valid answer.
I think the fact that Siri launched on the Mac without HomeKit support is one of the most embarrassing things for Apple.
What I think is difficult is they have this preconceived notion that your phone will be in the interface that you want to speak to Siri in. And that's an assumption that I think is faulty, because for people who are multilingual, you may want to have your phone in one language as an interface because you don't switch that very much. Right? It's kind of a pain to go through and tell the phone to change interface language. But you want to be able to dictate or handle Siri in other languages. You can switch keyboards, but you can't switch which language that you want to dictate in.
Yeah, that would make sense.
And when you try and speak in the other language, if your phone interface is, for example, set to English, and you start dictating in Hebrew, for example, it doesn't know what to do with it. It has no idea. If you switch the phone's interface to Hebrew and dictate in Hebrew, it works perfectly. If you try and dictate in English, it again doesn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, that seems like something that they should be able to add, but I mean, I'm not holding my breath at this point.
No, I understand, but it's still, a valid use case would be something like Switzerland, where Switzerland has two languages, German and French.
Right.
And you speak both. But if your phone is set as one as the primary one, then that's the one you get to dictate in.
Yeah.
This is dumb.
Certainly in Quebec as well.
There you are. All right. Let's move along. I want to talk about these headphones you reviewed. Go on. Tell me about them.
So I reviewed
what are these ugly things here?
I reviewed the Audeze iSign 10 headphones. Audeze is a premium headphone company that specializes in really high-end, really nice headphones, and they managed to do.
Well, they got an absurd name, and these things look like. They look like the sides of TIE fighters from Star Wars.
Yeah, so the iSign 10, this company specializes in planar magnetic technology. And basically what that is using magnets with a membrane in between to get a more uniform sound. So when you have a traditional headphone or speaker or whatever, there's a central point on the membrane that moves. With magnets on each side, you can have essentially the entire membrane move, which on a small scale means that when it comes to your ears, you get a more uniform and a more dynamic sound. Now, this technology has for years been in larger headphones, including from companies like Audeze, and they are generally big on-ear can-style headphones because if you think about the space that it takes to build that type of technology, it's just large. So this company somehow managed to cram this stuff down into, I can't really call them earbuds per se, but I called them for the headphone review in-ear because they are small enough and light enough that you could use them without the clips that come with them, and they will stick in your ear. They have like a little piece that goes in your ear, and then a lot of it rests on the outside because that's where they had to put the membrane and the magnets to make the sound. And they look a little ridiculous, I'm not going to lie.
All they're missing is a blue LED, and you'll look like a Cyberman from Doctor Who.
Thank goodness there are no blue LEDs on these because they're wired. But blue LEDs flashing on every device are like the bane of my existence. Like I take like duct tape and put it over everything.
Black masking tape.
Oh yeah,
Black
electrical
matte
tape.
masking tape.
I'll just grab whatever I can. But like I have a pair of headphones from Turtle Beach that are 5.1 gaming headphones that sometimes I'll use, just not to wake anybody up while playing a game or watching TV or whatever. And they have just on the right side a pulsing blue light that is so bright that it illuminates the room. Like I can see just like imagine you're trying to watch a movie and just a blue light keeps flashing like an airplane's about to land or something. So I had to cover it up with tape, and it turns out it's the power button too. So I have a piece of tape over the power button that I have to lift up. It's so stupid. But anyhow, don't get me started on that. These headphones look ridiculous, as people in our comments and on Twitter noted. They are not your normal headphones. They look this way for a reason. Now, the aesthetics of the TIE Fighter aside, the outside of the ear has to be so large just because I don't think that they could physically shrink it down any more than they have. But the end result is a pretty outstanding pair of headphones. They connect through the lightning cable on your iPhone or your iPad. It's a proprietary DAC on there that they call the Cipher cable, which actually has its own memory on there that will remember your custom settings for the headphones. And then so when you plug
like equalization and stuff like that? Okay.
So you can do the equalization through their app and then save it to the cable. It'll have 2 presets on there, and then you can switch between them and plug it into another device that doesn't have that installed or you didn't configure it on. It'll work just the same. But I found that the out-of-the-box settings were fine enough. But then again, if you're the type to spend $400 on in-ear headphones like this, then you probably are the type that would want to customize it or do some sort of custom setting like that. But yeah, I mean, they're not cheap. There is a $350 option that does not include the lightning cable, but if you're, listening to the Apple Insider podcast and you're interested in these headphones, pay the $50 and get it with the lightning cable, believe me. But I mean, they sound fantastic. I've never heard in-ear headphones or buds or anything like that sound as good as this. Just absolute outstanding quality. The range and space for each individual sound as you listen to music or whatever you're listening to. Everything has a very clearly defined space in it. A lot of times when you have cheaper headphones or whatever, everything kind of becomes muddied and the vocals and the bass kind of drown each other out and you can't hear the guitars and whatever. But here, if you're listening for specific instruments or specific elements, it works really, really, really well.
And on top of that, I want to mention, besides the earphones and the cable that you get in the package, there's of course an instruction manual which is loaded on a USB thumb drive. So bonus, you get a free thumb drive. You get a cleaning brush.
Yes.
Which is of course useful because everyone has nasty ears and you want to keep them clean.
And these go in your ears. So
clean out the tips on these so that you can hear, as opposed to having them plugged up with stuff. Did you jog with these at all, or were you just wearing them around the house?
No, I didn't jog. I use them on.
Hey, we got pictures of Dan Dilger doing handstands with AirPods in.
I have jogged with my AirPods, but I did not jog with these. I prefer wireless headphones when I exercise. These are decidedly not wireless, but I did try them out because the key element of these is this is for somebody who wants. They don't want to compromise. They want the smallest possible form factor and they want the best possible sound, right? So I want to test these out in situations where if you wanted that portability, so for example on the train or on an airplane, so I would just put them in my pocket and carry them around in my jeans, and they, while larger than a pair of earbuds, are still small enough and not really that big of a deal to carry in your jeans. And yeah, I mean, they do what they set out to do. It takes headphone technology that should be in a large form factor and crams it down into something that you could comfortably fit in a bag or in your pocket.
Brilliant. I tried these on at CES and I liked them very much. And yeah, if I had 400 bones, I would probably have them.
Yeah, I mean, as somebody who really likes different types of headphones, people buy them for different reasons. They buy them for aesthetics, for fashion, for quality, whatever. Headphones are a very personal choice. And so it's always difficult for me to do these types of headphone reviews because I don't want to knock the aesthetics of any product that I review too much because it's all personal. Somebody might look at these and think they're the coolest headphones you've ever seen, right?
And that person needs to get their eyes checked.
They are head turners.
Okay. Let's be very frank about this. These are not fashion forward by any sense of the imagination. These are not good looking headphones. They're good sounding headphones.
Right. I'm not going to sit here and say they're good looking. I will say that they are unique and they're charming in their own way, but I would not say that they are particularly good looking headphones.
All right. So let me ask you this. You rated these things a 4 out of 5.
Yes.
They're $400. Why did they not get 5 out of 5? What did they need to do more of for you to give them that perfect score?
I mean, I think that the aesthetics do ding it in a way, just because of the fact that they look the way that they do. I can't completely discredit them for that. I think that I don't know. When I come up with a score, it's hard to say. I couldn't just give these a 5 out of 5 because they wouldn't be my everyday headphones for everything, right? They look like something else. That's really what it comes down to. My biggest problem with them and using them every day was that the lightning cable included with it is thick, and it actually makes it bulkier than the headphones themselves. It was actually thinner for me to use the 3.5 millimeter cable, and the cable is also 5 feet long, which was bulky and got snagged on stuff.
So you're dinging them a star out of your review because they look ugly and because the cable is too long.
I guess, yeah,
right?
Yeah. I mean, when I come up with a score on these reviews,
Right.
It's more of a gut feeling than anything else. There's no scientific measure to what.
Well, there are a couple approaches you can take, right? You can take what's called sort of a net promoter approach, which says that anything less than perfect is negative, and so you start at perfect and you detract for everything that's not right.
Right.
And the other approach is you start one approach is you start at an average, like a 3, and you build up or down from there as based on what's above average or below average.
Mm-hmm.
And another approach is to start at 0 and build up from there. I like to start out, my default position is, do they do the job they said they set out to do, and how well?
Yeah.
Right? If their job was coming out and saying, we're going to make the very best sounding earbuds that work with a lightning cable, did they do their job? Yes, they did. Okay, great. What did they do wrong? And then detract from there.
I would say if these headphones cost $250, I give them a 5 out of 5.
Oh, okay, so for $400 headphones, they look bad and they have too long a cable, but if they were $250, you'd forgive them that.
Yeah, because I think price is definitely part of the thing that you have to weigh in. I mean, we don't live in a vacuum.
No. And you're right. Would you spend $400 for this is a valid question. But
I would not personally spend $400 on this, is the way that I would put it. If I was going to spend $400, I would get a comfortable set of on-ear larger headphones and use those for those purposes. When I want portable headphones on the train or whatever, I don't need the highest quality headphones. I just want something to bang out some tunes and whatever while I'm...
Neil, only the highest quality products can begin to bless my ears with sound.
So again, when I review stuff, I have to kind of take a step back from who I am versus who my reader is versus who wants this product, right? You have to weigh all of those types of things. So that's obviously my personal bias is going to play a part in this because of my personal needs. Now, I try not to say this kind of stuff when I write a review because who cares about what I want? Nobody really is reading. Nobody's reading my reviews to go, oh, I wonder, what Neil thinks of this. Like,
well, but it comes into a part of, how did you come to this conclusion?
Yeah, and so like I'll read a lot of reviews where like you read headphone reviews and a lot of times it's like somebody it almost feels like they're trying to brag to you about their personal music collection and they start like name dropping the songs that they listen to and stuff.
No. I mean, when I read reviews where they name drop the songs, it's not about, oh, check out my cool tunes. It's not listen to my record collection. It's these were the things that I used to evaluate it on, and if you listen, you'll hear the same kinds of things I was hearing here.
Well,
and then
yeah,
you can decide if that's what you wanted.
I read a review last year from The Verge where I won't name the guy's name, but he said that he got chills when the beat dropped in some Childish Gambino song while listening to AirPods, and I'm like, really? Like, I don't care. Like, okay, great, you listen to Childish Gambino, good for you.
But there's something to that, right? And it should have been written better. But the idea is, when that bass hit comes in this pair of earphones, it makes this song come alive to me. That's what I want
AirPods?
out of good audio. No, I'm just not saying about the AirPods specifically. I'm saying if you're writing a review, you cite the song for this reason so that someone else can say, okay, they heard that with that song on those headphones. I'm going to take that song and listen to it on my headphones and see if I hear the same thing. And then I can try out those other headphones and see if I hear what they were hearing. But it gives you something, because this is an objective thing, right? We aren't putting up frequency charts and saying, at 25 megahertz, it played at this decibel. We're saying this is what we heard objectively. You can then take the same song and see if you heard objectively too.
Well, but it's subjective at that point, not objective, because you're saying what you hear from it.
But the point is that you need to have something to compare with so that there's anything at all to relate to here.
Well, most of the stuff I listen to sounds like it was recorded in somebody's garage anyhow, so I don't really know that it matters to too many people what my musical taste is.
Right, and good audio reviews will name a range of different genres with a number of different recording engineers. So you'll get a classic rock song, you'll get something out of a Criterion collection, you'll get some piece of classical music, you'll get a broad range of things so that you can see how it performs across different genres and different recording engineers.
And we are not Headphone Insider, we are Apple-Insider, and so the purpose...
Speak for yourself, Neil, speak for yourself.
The purpose of the review, because I'm certainly not while I like headphones, I am certainly not qualified to the degree of someone who reviews them for a living would. And so I prefer, even though I do address the sound quality there, and the sound quality is outstanding, our review is written more from the perspective, and the reason that we're interested in these headphones specifically, from the perspective of integration into Apple's products. And how
they had a lightning cable. That's why we reviewed these things.
Yes, that is why they reviewed these things, because they had a lightning cable. That is absolutely correct.
Got it. But you liked them. You gave them 4 out of 5.
Yeah, and when you give a score like that, it's kind of a gut feeling, but you have to consider all kinds of factors, your own bias, including who your audience is, in this case, Apple users, and also just, general folks that might stumble across your review. What do they want to read? I don't know that, my use case of not wanting to spend $400 on headphones to bring on the train that have, planar magnetic head technology would be worth $400 to me, but maybe worth $250 to me,
Got it. So Conan O'Brien, let's give some background here before I say Conan O'Brien's name again, Conan O'Brien. So there's this fellow in U.S. Congress. He's a Republican representative named Jason Chaffetz, who attempted to explain the Republican healthcare plan by comparing its price to that of an iPhone. He said that Americans have choices. They've got to make a choice. So rather than getting that new iPhone that they just love and want to go spend hundreds of dollars on that, maybe they should invest in their own healthcare. Now, first of all, this is an absurd statement. This is just bizarre because the cost of an iPhone is far, far, far less than the cost of healthcare in America. For our non-U.S. listeners, you can spend anywhere from $300 or so up to $1,000 a month on healthcare plans in America, depending on, of course, your general health and pre-existing histories and the kind of plan and coverage you sign up for and how many people you're covering in a family kind of thing. But it's nuts to say that you should withhold having an iPhone because you should pay for health insurance when the two aren't anywhere close in number.
It's not even a direct comparison anyhow. It's stupid.
And so it kind of breaks down to basically saying poor people shouldn't have nice things is what he's really saying there. It's reprehensible. But Conan O'Brien, who is a late night TV show host on what is he on, TBS?
Yep, TBS.
Made a minute-long spoof where he created an Apple-like advertisement saying that, his copy was at Apple. We don't think you should have to choose between an iPhone and quality healthcare because you can have both. With apps like Apple Health, you can monitor your fitness and create your own medical ID. And then he started listing that an imaginary iPhone could assist with eye, ear, and throat exams and act as a thermometer with a 5-day internal forecast. And using other devices like an iPad and third-generation Apple TV remote, they said that, you can provide common and advanced diagnostic services. They made up using blood transfusions using an iPad and a patellar reflex test using the iPad as a hammer and things like that, right? And the reason that I bring it up here is not because I want to talk about Jason Chaffetz being a fool, which we've already done, or because I want to talk about Conan O'Brien's ad so much. But what was interesting to me is that almost all of the things that they imagined for this false advertisement exist.
There's an app for that.
Pretty much. They named Apple Health for monitoring stuff and keeping track of stats, fine. But there are a wide number of thermometers that work with iOS. There's one from Withings Nokia that's called Thermo that you simply hold to your forehead and it syncs with Bluetooth over to the phone to an app. Which syncs with Withings Health, which also syncs with Apple Health. There's There's one from Kinza, and Kinza makes one that uses the headphone jack on 6S and earlier devices, and they also make a Bluetooth one that is the classic in-ear kind of style. There are several of these guys out there. There was one that I had last year that was interesting because it was a small patch that you used with double-sided tape to stick to a child's body and could monitor their temperature throughout the day or night. So you could see when their fever broke in the night kind of thing. There are a ton of these things for temperature. There are a ton of these things for blood pressure, cardio, which we wrote about this week. They have a blood pressure monitor cuff that works with HealthKit and is simple and easy, and it reads systolic and diastolic blood pressure. Withings Nokia has been doing that too. There are a ton of these things out there. So
I'm actually going to put you on the spot right now, Victor. My wife sent me a message earlier to let me know that we've had one of those Fitbit scales for a while, but this is back when we used Fitbit devices. Now we don't have one anymore, or we don't have Fitbit anymore, and I guess the scale has died. So I was thinking about getting a HealthKit connected scale. Do you have one that you recommend?
I would say the Withings Nokia one is the one to have.
That does HealthKit?
The old model, it does, yeah. The old model was a WS30. They've since changed this to they've got two models now. I have the older model, but I've seen the newer ones at CES. They have body cardio, and let's see, what's the price on this guy? So they have one that's $180, and they have one that is going to be about $99, I believe. Or $69, I can't recall.
I will go with the cheaper model.
Of course, but they, my recollection is they're Bluetooth and Wi-Fi, and they automatically synchronize with their HealthMate app, and then from the HealthMate app, they go to HealthKit. And that's the way that I use them.
But it would have to sync with HealthKit through your phone, right? It couldn't do it, like your phone would have to be nearby and connect over Bluetooth, I assume.
Well, no. So what happens is because the scale is Wi-Fi, when you connect it with your phone over Bluetooth and transfer the Wi-Fi details to the scale then syncs with the Withings cloud, and then the cloud comes back to your phone via Wi-Fi for the app, and then the app syncs to HealthKit.
Got it. Cool. Neat. Okay.
So you don't actually have to be near the scale for any of this to work.
Cool. Well, except for the initial setup.
Actually stepping the initial setup, but
except for stepping on the scale.
Right. So they have two models. They have the body cardio that's $179, and they have the body model, which is $99.
Cool.
And honestly, that $99 model will take care of your needs pretty much. They're both good products.
Just looking to know how fat I am. That's all.
Well, I mean, we can talk about that, but I mean, it's not about. They do a little bit more than that, right? They do how fat you are. They do your BMI. They tell you the weather forecast when you're done measuring your weight, so you know what it's going to be like when you're getting dressed in the morning, kind of thing. You get a high and a low, and icons for what the weather is for that. If you use one of their activity trackers, it'll display the previous day's steps on there to see. You can correlate your steps with your weight. So your yesterday's steps were 8,000 steps, and today you've lost minus 2 pounds.
Cool.
Right? Today you're down 2 pounds, something like that. So you can see that kind of relationship's happening. They do weight, fat mass, muscle mass, water, and bone mass. It's pretty comprehensive.
I'll have to check
I know all you wanted was a bathroom scale, but hey, your wife put me on the spot, so there you go.
There you go. We'll see what we get.
But that was my overriding point, was that it's one of these things where Conan says he's doing this to try and be wacky and parody, but once again, the real world is too strange for the news to actually be funny.
It is sad but true.
It's kind of amazing The Onion hasn't gone out of business yet with how wacky the world is right now. So Didi is a ride-hailing sort of automated taxi kind of thing in China that Apple invested in. And they have opened a self-driving car lab near Apple in California.
Yeah, this is interesting because I wonder if it's a way for Apple to kind of indirectly do research on the self-driving car. One of the things is they have to get the proper permits and all that to approve to drive a car around California or wherever.
As Uber found out.
Yes. So I just wonder when I see this story, is the partnership with Didi a way for Apple to kind of hand off this and partner on this stuff without putting their name on it to maintain their secrecy?
Well, and we've seen that before where they've created shell companies of things to do all the research and then at the last minute switch it over to Apple's branding kind of thing.
Right. But this is a way for them to not only do a shell company, but to have an actual company that does, all kinds of driving around China to use their data to build out a platform.
For sure. We've seen that Project Titan, which is the name that we're using for all of their self-driving efforts, has changed a lot as we've covered it, right?
Right.
It was going to be they're building a car or they're doing self-driving efforts or anything like that. And we've seen them have trouble trying to find different places to have tracks. Here, Didi's got the track going now. So
Yep.
it makes sense what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Interesting to me, just because I'm liking this, Charlie Miller, who is a fellow who's known for remotely hacking a Jeep well in motion, was poached from Uber's self-driving team to lead Didi's security and safety development teams.
Also interesting, yes.
I mean, I like the idea of the people who know how to hack these things being the people in charge of the security of them.
Agreed.
And that was a very scary thing. So the remote driving Jeep kind of thing was they were able to remotely control over a cellular network a Jeep, I think it was a Grand Cherokee or one of these, while it was in motion on the highway. And they were able to do things like shut off the air conditioning and blast the heat. Mm-hmm. And they were able to lock the doors and keep the windows up. And they were also able to shut off the engine and fire the brakes.
It's terrifying.
On a highway? Oh my God.
Yeah.
Nightmare.
Yeah.
And of course, Jeep learned their lesson from that and issued a firmware update. But you don't really want to have your car need that kind of a firmware update.
Well, it goes back to what you were talking about with all these connected health devices. Do we really need everything to be connected?
So the question is, what is the vision you're trying to get to? Right? And then you could say the same thing about connected home, where all those webcams used the same default password and were able to be taken over. Right? So what is the use scenario here? Why would you want connected health? Well, for one thing, you want connected health to inform yourself and better reach goals. Right? The other thing that you want to do is, when we talk about CareKit, be able to feed that into research and development for medicine, so that doctors can better know how to treat a condition. So there is a valid need for connected health, at least in some form.
Yes.
Connected car, we're not seeing it yet because we're talking about self-driving. Okay, so now it makes sense to have things connected so that you can do traffic management and so that cars can be aware of each other and drive in swarms. Right now, we're at the early days where cars are going to be aware of themselves and navigate around obstacles, and every other thing moving is seen as an obstacle.
Right.
And what we're going to get to in a grander vision of this is that cars form networks, and that instead of everything else just being a dumb movable thing, everything else will report in, and they can collaboratively arrange traffic and traffic flows. And we're not there yet, but that there's a reason for things to be networked.
Correct.
If we want that future.
Yes.
Speaking of awareness and crystal balls, so there was this giant leak that came out of a WikiLeaks CIA data dump. And among many things that it said that there were a lot of vulnerabilities that the CIA had on iOS.
Yeah, this was kind of a story that was blown out of proportion for a number of reasons. It's important to remember that WikiLeaks is believed largely to be an arm of the Russian government, who is currently under investigation from the FBI for potentially attempting to interfere with the U.S. election in 2016. So,
well, let's give a little bit more context than that. WikiLeaks is an organization that started out on the proposition that everything and anything that should be leaked, right? They said that they were the ones that leaked. I'm blanking on the name. It was this private in the U.S. Army who I can't believe I'm blanking on the name.
Chelsea Manning.
That's the one. Yes. Yeah. So they were the ones that leaked that information, and at that time they were very, very unpopular with U.S. Republicans. Now, of course, they've switched around and are very, very popular with U.S. Republicans. So you
potentially as a result of a coordinated campaign by the Russian government to influence the election. Having said that, and that is why I say that not to stir up a political firestorm here, but to give context in which you should take this information with a grain of salt.
Especially about this particularly.
Yes.
Because it's about a CIA leak, and so the Russians might have some reason for wanting that known and whatever.
Right. This is to potentially to undermine our faith in institutions.
WikiLeaks itself doesn't necessarily have to have a political bent in that, because their bent is just leaking stuff.
Yeah, I mean, right. In theory, I think that the reality of
that's all I wanted to get out of that.
The reality of this is, and I'm not saying any of this to defend the CIA or their tactics or the apparent
or
spying
WikiLeaks or anyone.
I don't really have a side in all of this. If anybody comes out looking good, once again, it's Apple. The truth of this is, there's no evidence in there that anybody's phone is currently at risk of being compromised. The threats that were spelled out very loosely in these documents that were released by WikiLeaks from the CIA talk about a number of so-called zero-day exploits for a number of platforms, including the iPhone. But in the case of the iPhone, the ones that were mentioned there are ones that have been patched or require physical access to the phone. So the problem with the way this was presented was WikiLeaks put it out and made it sound as though certain apps like WhatsApp and some other things were potentially compromised remotely, and that their data could be just accessed by the CIA. The truth of it is very different. This is something where they would have to get physical access to your phone, would then compromise the overlying operating system, and then could get access to the apps and the data within the apps. That is not happening, that we know of, at least, to the average consumer. So while people's thoughts on CIA spying, and certainly the zero-day exploits they were utilizing, which were in violation of a mandate from the Obama administration, which was that they should have a policy of disclosing zero-day exploits to companies to allow them to patch holes, the CIA was instead paying for companies to keep them quiet and stockpiling these zero-day exploits so they could use it for intelligence purposes. I think that the real story here is, first of all, there's no major security threat to Apple. It's just evidence that the CIA is working to crack, which, surprise, surprise, of course they are.
No one is surprised by that, right?
And second of all, that the CIA was not in compliance with a executive order or suggestion, I suppose it was not an order, but to release these zero-day exploits to the companies involved so that they would have an opportunity to patch them as they are discovered. And instead, the CIA is actually paying money to hacking organizations to buy these exploits so that they can use them for their own purposes of spying and whatever.
Which, and unfortunately, probably also isn't surprising once you talk about it, but is kind of annoying that they wouldn't follow the lead from the administration.
None of this is surprising. I mean, this is the same group of folks that really wanted Apple and other companies to leave a backdoor in their software so that in events of emergency, the FBI or whoever, the CIA...
Well, no. We need to be careful because the FBI were the ones asking for that. Well, the NSA and CIA were saying, no, don't.
Well, when I say the same people, I meant just, the intelligence community. But
spooks.
Yeah, I think that, there's certainly... there are legitimate reasons for people in the intelligence community who want to have this information. They're coming at it from a perspective of security first. And there are certain people on certain walks of life and on certain ends of the political spectrum that may agree with that approach. I do not personally agree with that approach. Apple as a company does not agree with that approach, but it does not mean that it's necessarily the wrong approach, but it just comes down to a fundamental philosophical difference on how we treat people and the amount of trust that we place and the amount of personal freedom and the personal privacy that you have a right to as a citizen and as a consumer of goods.
Right. Specifically, the leaks talked about 14 different iOS exploits, and most of them were eradicated by a reboot of the device. So if you reboot your device, you have effectively cleared most of these as exploits if you had them at all anyway. And the others were purged by a restore. So if you restore your device periodically to a fresh state, you will have also gotten rid of all of these things.
And the leaked documents were from late 2015, early 2016, which means they were out before iOS 10 was even announced. So
right. So if you have an iPhone 5 and are stuck on, or if you're stuck on iOS 5 or on iOS 9, you might have a reason to be concerned.
Yeah.
But there was another interesting one. They had a exploit for the airport devices.
Yep. They tried. Yeah.
They decompiled Apple's code to install a rootkit into the flash storage of the airport.
Yeah, it was pretty extensive hacking efforts. Again,
intriguing, right?
Again, if you're paying attention, for the last, I don't know, 60 years of the CIA and the U.S. intelligence, you're not really that surprised by any of this. But yeah, I mean, of course the CIA is going to try to hack airport routers. It doesn't surprise me.
They also tried to compromise the EFI bootloader on Mac OS.
Right. And that's what they're going to do. That is how intelligence agencies work. The methods that they use, while sometimes clandestine, have now been put out in the open thanks to this leak, and supposedly there's more to come. But there was a lot of scaremongering going on about Apple potentially being under attack or compromised or dangerous in some way, and it's just not true.
Yeah. What interesting is they were trying to have the to inject data into internet traffic and have Little Snitch, which is an application that shows you when data is being transferred. Mm-hmm. They were trying to obscure it from that. But there's another application, one written by a fellow named Jonathan Zidiarski, who is on Twitter, and it's called Little Flocker. And Little Flocker, instead of monitoring the data transfer and telling you about it in the way that Little Snitch does, it asks you at every step of the way, would you like to grant permissions for this application to do this thing? And so it sets up rules to gatekeep against applications doing weird things. For example, Microsoft Word is requesting access for the webcam. And you can say, well, no, I still want to use Word, but it's not going to use the webcam, and disallow that from happening. And Little Flocker would it seems like, prevent this kind of exploit from the CIA.
And it's important to draw the distinction, too, when you look at iOS. Many of these security functions and capabilities are already built into iOS as a platform. It was designed from the beginning to be limited and to be as user transparent as possible. So you can open the Settings app on your iPhone and go into Privacy and see a whole list of services that applications need to request your approval before they can access any of that information.
Mm-hmm. And it's fairly granular on iOS, where it will ask you location, it will ask you microphone, it will ask you camera, as opposed to Android, where it's pretty much all or none, and then you can go back through their settings application in Android and make it more granular for applications. Apple released a statement. They said that Apple is deeply committed to safeguarding our customers' privacy and security. The technology built in today's iPhone represents the best data security available to consumers, and we're constantly working to keep it that way. So they have nearly 80% of users running the latest version, and that pretty much almost everything in these leaks has already been patched within the latest iOS. They're going to continue to work to rapidly address any identified vulnerabilities. And they encourage you, our listeners, to keep current.
Yep. It's not as big of a story as it was made out to be from an Apple perspective, but it is a big story in how you fall on privacy and government snooping and national security and those types of issues.
Yeah. Well, and that brings us to the close of another episode of Apple Insider Podcast. I encourage all of our listeners, hey, you guys out there, please feel free to go ahead and like and give us reviews on iTunes, and send us email. We like getting your email. We like talking to you guys, and also reading your letters in the podcast. Neil, where can people find you on the internet?
You can read me on AppleInsider.com, and you can find me on Twitter at thisisneil, Neil.
I'm your host, Victor Marks, and thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with more.